The first time I held the Legend of Zelda game pack in my hands, I was struck with awe. Cast in gold plastic, the game looked precious, powerful, and honestly, a bit intimidating. But then I popped it into my NES, pressed power, and was met with a title screen that birthed a fandom that would last decades. The Legend of Zelda. Press start, let's go. And go I did. Over the days, weeks, and months that followed, unraveling The Legend of Zelda became like a daily routine. It was the first game I had played where getting to the goal was sometimes more fun than actually achieving the goal itself. Getting lost in Hyrule never felt like a chore. There was just the right amount of freedom, more than the linear levels of Super Mario Bros. And less than what sometimes felt like a tireless expanse of Final Fantasy. Action around every turn, a surprise at every screen, and a potential secret always a bomb throwaway. It was the first game I had ever played that truly made me feel like an adventurer. On this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, 7 fellow Zelda fans and I dive into our personal recollections of the first entry in the Legend of Zelda series, the moments, the memories, and the magic of this timeless classic. Time to dry clean your favorite green tunic and wave farewell to the old man in the cave as we set off on the first adventure, The Legend of Zelda, for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Did you see the latest Nintendo newsletter?
Whoa, nice graphics. I'd like to get my hands on that game.
You mean you haven't played it yet? We can play it on my Nintendo Entertainment System. It's The Legend of Zelda, and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad. Octoroks, Tektites, Levers, too. But with your help, our hero pulls through. Yeah, go Link. Yeah, get Zelda. Awesome. Intense.
The Nintendo Entertainment System. Your parents help you hook it up. The Legend of Zelda sold separately.
I had to do it. I couldn't help myself. I had to do it. I know, it's on the nose. I've heard it 1,000 times, but this wouldn't have been complete without it. I apologize if those 30 seconds were annoying to you. But that's how we got to kick things off. And if you listen to this show with any regularity, you know I love first impressions. The moment you pop something into the system, hit the power button, and magic happens. And this episode, of course, is going to be no different. Starting us off with this conversation is Seth Sturgill from the All End podcast, Mike Albertin of Games My Mom Found, and Reverend D of the Rulebooks Anonymous podcast.
Yeah. Awesome, man. So let's go ahead and, not fast forward, but let's go ahead and start at the beginning with The Legend of Zelda for the NES. You know, you spoke very kindly about it, and you shared that really awesome story about kind of your origins with it. But what I'd like to do is maybe kind of go a little deeper into that moment when you turned on Legend of Zelda, that shiny gold cartridge.
Yeah.
And right, you have that in your hand. How old were you when you first started playing it?
I must have been 4.
Okay.
Maybe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Super young. So you were
very
popping that into the NES. You're presented with this open screen with no instruction, and you're 4, so you're not really reading any instruction manuals either. Like, you're just there.
Right.
Can you and again, I know as a 4-year-old it's probably really hard to do, but what was that feeling of being in that open space and, first thing you see, a door, you walk in, you grab a sword, it's shiny, of course you grab it, and then beginning that adventure. Can you even place yourself on what you were feeling at that moment?
Yeah, so I definitely had my uncle there guiding me.
Cool. Awesome.
Which is definitely, I think, something that is really special about games in general, and something that I've tried. I don't have kids, but I have a lot of younger siblings, and that's something that I've kind of tried to replicate with my younger siblings. My little brother playing, Skyrim or whatever. I definitely, want to sit there and be the kind of guiding force or whatever, and create those memories for him. And so I definitely think that was a component of it. But yeah, thinking back to just sort of like the immediacy of that first Legend of Zelda game, like just sort of being off to the races, just sort of like, you know, the way that game is designed is so brilliant, because you just kind of start and like there's the cave. It's obvious that that's where you need to go. Like it couldn't be more obvious. The cave is colored dramatically differently from anything else on the screen. There's the, you know, big empty space to denote that it's a door that you need to walk through. It just makes sense. Like the second you put your hands on it, in the way that with Mario, it's just like, okay, cool. Like I put my hands on it. I know I need to run. The game sort of forces me to learn how to jump. Otherwise the Goomba's going to run right into me and I'm going to lose a life. You know, Nintendo's really good at that. And I think that sort of resonates with me. Just the immediacy of the adventure of just running in there, having the sword, and you're just off to the races. And I kind of love that the first one doesn't hold your hand at all.
No, it doesn't.
I kind of love that it just kind of lets you go. Like there's a feeling of retro games in general, the very like handholdy retro games, of just like you have the time, and this maybe comes from being a kid and having all the time in the world to play video games, which is obviously very different for us as adults. But you have the time to explore and make mistakes and, you know, bang your head against the wall and figure out over the course of like hours, maybe even days, that, oh, I have to go this way versus that way, and I don't have the thing I need yet. I have to go back and collect this and then come back, and maybe that translates to things outside of the video game. Maybe I need to start, you know, taking the time to map the stuff out on a notepad, you know.
Right.
That's the kind of thing, like when a video game just allows you that space to breathe. I think that was really powerful for me as a kid, just like the absolute freedom baked into the game design of that first Legend of Zelda game, which is still unique and resonant today. Like there's a reason when they approach Breath of the Wild, they literally just, you know, kind of made the Breath of the Wild version of the original Legend of Zelda. Like,
really did. They really did.
I mean, there's a reason they incorporated it that way, is because like you just the freedom and the player expression and the breathing room, the time to just reflect and think and learn and fail and succeed, I think is really important about that game.
Firstly, though, with The Legend of Zelda, you know, we've had 36 years of this game. What does this franchise mean to you personally?
It means a lot to me personally. One, I have my wedding band when I got married has a Triforce on it.
Oh, cool.
So
that's cool.
It means a lot to me in that aspect. It's also my first ever gaming memory that I have any recollection of. This is the first Legend of Zelda game. I didn't play it. A neighbor kid who I hung out with when I was like 4 years old had it, and he was playing it. And I remember he didn't want to play it. He wanted to play other games. And I'm like, no, play Zelda. And that's my first gaming memory. So that's partly where Zelda, for me, like, I you know, really has affected my life.
And that was that Link to the Past?
Oh, no, that was actually The Legend of Zelda.
Oh, wow,
Nintendo.
the original. Okay,
but
wow.
I didn't play it, and then I didn't like get around to it till years later. But it was the first one that I ever remember any game at all, is that memory.
Interesting. So your very first gaming memory was one of the hardest ones to play.
I mean, I didn't touch the controller. I was 4. And this kid was like, I think, God, had to have been 7 or 8. He was older than me by a decent amount, so he wasn't letting the 4-year-old touch the controller. He was just like,
No.
you can watch me.
And even just by like seeing it, not even experience it, controlling it, playing it, just seeing it struck a chord with you, it sounds like. Let's talk a little bit about your history with The Legend of Zelda. You mentioned that you started with the first one. Was that the first one you'd ever played with, or did you start somewhere else and go back to that?
I started with the very first one on the original Nintendo.
Cool. Can you share with me a bit of the history as how you got the game and your experiences playing it as a kid?
Well, it started off with going to a family friend's house, and they had a Nintendo with all sorts of different games, and they were playing Zelda. So I started playing it, and it was different from all the other games I play. I played a lot of Mega Man and a lot of Mario and everything, but this one was a lot different. I enjoy fantasy settings in a lot of games and my books and everything. So this just really appealed to me, and I got to enjoy the exploration and finding all the different weapons. I actually had started drawing maps of where all the different heart containers were, just so that I could, if I started over again, then I could just easily pick up the heart containers. So when I'm going into the first dungeon, I'm already decked out with the blue ring or 6 hearts or something.
Mm-hmm.
But it just, I really enjoyed it. I loved finding all of the different secrets. There's this rush that you get when you're playing these games and you're discovering all these different secrets, like going into the graveyard and discovering certain gravestones move, and oh look, there's a hidden staircase and there's some kind of secrets under there. And that really appealed to me. So I'm just looking around and finding every last little secret that I could. And it just started on almost unhealthy obsession.
Did you make any maps or draw any hint sheets or anything for yourself as you were kind of exploring the world?
I started off drawing maps, and then at some point I did get, I think it was a big full-size map from Nintendo Power, and so I was marking on there where to bomb the different walls and where to where to burn the trees and stuff like that. And then I promptly lost it, so I was back to square one.
No.
Yeah.
Where did it go?
I have no idea. It just disappeared.
Are you? Wait a second. Oh, no. So you worked on this thing for probably months, is my guess.
Yes.
Months and months. And all of a sudden, it's just one day you walk downstairs, go to the TV. Hey, where's my Zelda map I've been marking up for the last 2 months, 3 months? And it's gone. Wow. I want to go on a journalistic quest to find you your lost Zelda map. I do. I want to do it'd be impossible to do, but I want to track this thing down.
I was so bummed because that was so much work, and my memory right now isn't good, but my memory sucked back then too. So it's all that hard work of figuring out where to go is just gone.
That is just, that's heartbreaking, man. That's heartbreaking. Dude, I can't imagine. Luckily, I had the power, Nintendo Power. But here's a question, and this is going to require you to kind of really think back and put yourself into that space and into that headspace as a kid. When you first turned on the game, put in your name, boom, the opening screen, everybody knows your only option is the cave, right? You walk in the cave, you get the sword, you leave. What was your feeling when you realized that you could go anywhere you want? I was up, down, left, right, up to you.
I was excited because that, with Mario, you can only go to the right. But with Zelda, you could go pretty much anywhere you wanted. Realistically, you could probably do some of the dungeons out of order if you wanted to. I haven't done it, but I think that's an option.
I think it is, actually. I mean, especially for the first couple, you don't really need bombs or actually a special item. That's a very good point. Mm-hmm. And really, you don't know it's the what order the dungeon's in. It does tell you, I think, in the upper left or right hand side by the map, which one you're on. But if you don't pay attention to that, you'd have no idea. You would just stumble across this thing. Hey, walk in. What is this? And progress. And I wonder if a lot of younger players did that, because the game provides absolutely no pathfinding to where you're supposed to go. Almost to the point, I would say only until, they improved upon that over the years, but then Breath of the Wild comes, it's the exact same thing. Next up, Alan Petrozzi talks about the first time he experienced The Legend of Zelda a little later in life, which I think is an interesting perspective. A lot of people talk about Zelda from the time when they were kids. Alan didn't quite have that experience.
We'll hear from him, and then Moses, aka the well-read mage of the-pixels.com, talks about his first time exploring the world of digital 8-bit Hyrule.
So you were pretty familiar with the formula. You kind of understand what Zelda's all about. So how is it jumping into The Legend of Zelda? Let's just start with the first one. Without, as an older person who's, again, played Link to the Past and the other ones. How was it jumping into that?
I wasn't that much older. This was all almost at almost the exact same time, because this was like 2001. So to be fair, I was late to the game already for Ocarina of Time. It was like 2001. Sure. Majora's Mask was already out and all that. And then the GameCube was just coming along. And so we got to wait for Wind Waker, which was great. But in that meantime, that was when it was like, okay, here's him showing me Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, took me to the back room. Here's where Super Nintendo was. Oh, there's this other game that's very different, but still a Zelda game. You should also try that at some point. And then it was like when the pre-order came out and everything, that's when I got the disc, or he got the disc for the pre-order. And that's when he was like, okay, try these. I don't even think he had tried them. I can't remember.
Oh, wow.
Maybe his dad might have, or I don't know. But point being, when at that point I had played that game, I was kind of used to it because I had a Genesis as well. So I was like, the 16-bit era wasn't new to me. Mm-hmm. The 8-bit was, because it was even more obtuse. And things looked even less like what I would picture them being. And it told me nothing, right? So for me, most of my original experience with that game was, okay, I see a hole in the wall. Sounds about right. Go in the hole in the wall.
Sure.
Old man gives me sword. Okay. Even faster than the Link to the Past. Cool for it. Neat. All right. I was technically less lost at that point. It took me forever to get that sword in Link to the Past as a kid.
Sure.
So I was like, great, cool. Now we're cooking with gas. Go outside. Where now? I at least had something. I was in a dungeon when I got that sword and had a purpose. I was supposed to save somebody who was talking to me on my sleep. All right, let's go right. Go right. All right. Grass. All right. What's that red ball? That's. Oh, is that those things that were shooting at me and the other? I see. All right. All right. Let's go. Okay. Died.
Death. 3 hearts.
3
over
hearts.
And done with.
The blocking didn't feel good to me at all. I think it was also because I was used to a block button in the 3D games.
Yep.
And here is like, oh, that's right. You're not supposed to move, and it took me forever to figure that out. So dying. And again, this wasn't my game, so I would only have the patience to do that about 4 times. And then it was like, well, hey, you want to play Ocarina of Time? Cool.
What was your starting point with the franchise?
Let's see. What's with Zelda 1, man?
Okay.
And what a heck of a Zelda to start with.
I know.
Yeah.
How do we do that as children?
I don't know. But, I was saying to other folks recently that I think as adults, we're like, you start up a new game, we're like, all right, how fast can I beat this?
Right.
A kid, though, and I watch my kids do this, they'll just want to exist in that world. Like, they don't even think about, like, getting through it as quickly as possible. They're the ones that are, like, people always be like with Zelda 1, they're like, how could anybody have found the one tree that you have to burn down? It's because kids are crazy like that.
Yeah.
An adult wouldn't do that because an adult's like, I got things to do. But a kid's like, I wonder what would happen if I tried to set every tree in the game on fire.
It's one of those things that's great for kids because you're right. Kids have that kind of patience, and not just patience, but persistence.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right? And kids have the time to do so. There was no limit when I was growing up. There was no limitation on games, so I could play Zelda for 4 hours and push at those edges, right? And ask friends who had done the same. So it's interesting you say that because often we look at games like this through nostalgic eyes, through like a nostalgic lens with modern eyes. If that makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I think that's pretty interesting that yeah, we had time to decipher everything in Zelda 1 because that's who we were. It's kind of how we were like designed, how we're wired.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and for me, I don't know how I did it. Like, dude, I didn't have electricity growing up. I mean, this is in Hawaii. They didn't invent electricity until like the year 2000. No, we had a generator.
Yeah, wow.
That ran on. So I'm not playing, video games during the day. My dad would turn on the generator at night for a couple hours.
Wow.
Watch some TV. We had one TV. Watch some TV. Maybe play some games after dinner. And then he'd turn it off, and there'd be candlelight or lantern light for the rest of the evening as we went to bed. So every once in a while, I'd bug him, leave it on, leave it on.
That's so interesting.
I was roughing it. But then visiting my grandmother during the summertime got in more game time. So all that to say, I think kids are extra ingenious at utilizing the time that's available to them to do things that adults really wouldn't do, just because the task-oriented way, the work-oriented way that we've developed for ourselves. Whereas kids, are more about the experience.
Now, all of these great recollections and positive memories are awesome. It's again one of those reasons why I do this show, but I also like hearing the other side of the coin. Remember, The Legend of Zelda wasn't an easy game. It's still not an easy game. I'm sure modern players would pick it up right now and just have trouble navigating the space and figuring out what to do next. There's a lot of pushing at the edges that you need to do to be successful at The Legend of Zelda. So a few of my guests had that exact issue and that exact problem the first time they played this landmark title. Coming up, we're going to hear from Blue Williams of the Gamers Week podcast, and then we're going to hear from Greg Sewart of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of YouTube videos, and hear how they experienced The Legend of Zelda for the very first time.
What was your first experience with the original Legend of Zelda? Kind of, when did you play that, and kind of what was your experience with that title?
So I look at The Legend of Zelda, for me, is a tragic story, a missed opportunity, if you will. Mm-hmm. So we never owned the Legend of Zelda games when I was a kid. They were always weekend rentals. So, I mean, you can guess how far are you going to get when you have to start over every single time. I mean, you can't save. Back then, you don't have the internet to what the heck am I supposed to be doing? Where am I supposed to go?
Right.
So there was that. It was really, really difficult to progress just as a weekend rental. Add to that the fact that you get to pick, when you go to rent a game for the weekend, you pick one for the family, right? So there are many kids in the family, and eventually the little ones don't want to rent Zelda anymore. Because it's boring. They think it's boring. It's brown. So much of the game is just brown.
There's a lot of brown in there. Yeah.
There's a lot of brown. Like they want to rent Bubble Bobble. They want to rent Kirby. They want to rent something that's bright and fast paced and easy for them to understand.
Sure.
So Zelda was something that I loved. I loved the exploration, but I was really just... It was something that stayed far away from me. I was not able to spend the time with it that I think I would have been able to if I was just like an only child or something.
So, well, let's start off with the 8-bit Zelda. You did not have it growing up. You said that you started with Zelda 2. But even when you eventually played it, what was some of your first impressions? And when did you eventually give it a go?
I actually didn't play the... Well, I'm not sure about this, because it was a long time ago, but
sure.
I don't believe I played it for more than a few minutes. I didn't play it seriously until probably closer to like 1990.
Okay.
I had already played through Zelda 2 by the time I really picked up Zelda. And to be honest, it didn't do much for me because I loved and still love Zelda 2. So, I knew that they weren't the same game. I knew that they were wildly different from one another. I liked the idea behind it, but I actually, back then, I found the world almost a little bit too intimidating, where I just didn't know, outside of knowing I had to go into that first cave,
Right.
and get my sword. I didn't know what to do, and the type of gamer that I was back then, I kind of wanted to know what to do. And there were nobody was shepherding you in the right direction, right?
Sure.
Which again is one of the things that makes the game great. But for me back then, that wasn't the kind of gamer I was. So like with first Zelda, it doesn't tell you what you need to do first, other than getting that sword. Then it says, okay, here's the world. Go on out, explore, find stuff. There are 8 dungeons out there somewhere, and you can stumble across them, and that's great. And when you look at something like Zelda 2, you sort of start in that place as well, but really until you have gone to the first castle, you can't really go anywhere else of importance, right? Like they started to refine the idea of, hey, this is open world, but we're going to give you a nice sort of push in the right direction every hour or so.
Sure.
So that to me was, for me with The Legend of Zelda, with the first one, that's what I wanted because that's what I was used to. And I just didn't get it. So I kind of passed it over for years. I did finally go back and play it. I think when it came out on like the Game Boy.
Oh wow.
The Game Boy Advance or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's when I finally played through it. So it was a long time.
It's The Legend of Zelda is, to me, I enjoy it quite a bit. I played it as a kid, but I had Nintendo Power maps and tips. I did not play that on my own. There was no way. It's a very unfriendly game.
It is.
Right? Like it's unfriendly in that I think a lot of people are attracted to that idea of just going through it. And I have a friend who was on the show early on in this show, talking about The Legend of Zelda, how he got it as a kid, and he realized, I can't get anywhere, I'm lost, I'm stuck, I'm 7 or whatever it was, and now I'm doomed. That's my game for the year. And then 3 months later went back to it and endeavored to learn everything about it, and drew maps and drew like every single square was documented with where the bombs, and he just completely dissected it, and of course ended up beating it. And I think it takes a very special sort of person to go through that kind of, right? Other than that, and without Nintendo Power, like I don't know how you get through that game. I really don't.
Well, you just described it.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
And it's funny because I say that, and at the same time, I played through the first Metroid, and that was before we had Nintendo Power here. And that was how I did it. A friend and I just we hand drew maps. And it didn't bother me then, but maybe it's because I was playing with somebody. The game was fairly new at the time, so we were both invested. And so maybe I just didn't have that with Zelda because everyone had moved on by the time I really sat down to play Zelda.
Ah, that heroic theme, the spirit of adventure, wandering through Hyrule, battling Tektites with sword and shield in hand. All of my patrons exhibit those characteristics of bravery and fortitude in support of this very show, and I greatly appreciate everything they do and their financial support. It truly helps offset some of the costs of this show, and it's well appreciated. Those people include Michael J. Williams, also known as BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sturgill of the All In Podcast, Dan of Retro Logic, Ryan Payne of the Gamers Week podcast, and of course, Pete Harney. You can join these warriors of Hyrule by going to patreon.com/agamerlooks40. 2 thin bucks gets you early access to episodes and other fun things. And if that's not quite your cup of tea, ratings and reviews on iTunes and other... iTunes? It's actually Apple Podcasts now. I can't keep track of these things. Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your favorite shows, please leave a like or a review there. It's greatly appreciated. Back to the show. So far, we've heard a lot about first impressions, so let's dive into those lifelong memories of The Legend of Zelda. The aforementioned Seth Sturgill starts us off with some thoughts about this game and some of the lasting memories that have lived within him for such a long time, and then Reverend D returns to do the same.
And I love how you mentioned creating memories. Because games like this that require you to reach out to others, I think Legend of Zelda requires that very well. For me, that was like the first Final Fantasy. It was one of those games that required me to talk to classmates and talk to people like, hey, how do I get this? The Legend of Zelda was very similar in that regard. My experience was a little different. I had Nintendo Power and I had the maps so it wasn't as bad for me, like in that regard, because I had the materials to help and I took all those materials, but I can see that being a really big deal for those who, like I said, just wanted to explore and figure it out and have the space to do so.
I think that space and just like time to learn something is so rare. Like even today, like I think that we're all just, you know, in today's society, and this translates to game design, it's go, 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 you know, and Zelda somehow found a way to be go, go, go and be very immediate while still giving the player a lot of room for reflection and a lot of room for learning and, you know, and even failing. And it's like, hey, you can go this far. You can, you know, dodge these shots from Octorocks or whatever, but sure would be easier if you had a shield. You know?
What are the standout moments for you in the first Legend of Zelda?
I think that for me, my standout moments with the first, I could talk about certain dungeons or certain bosses or whatever, but it really is just like the little emergent player moments. It's literally just fumbling around, and it's nothing in particular as much as it's just like, oh, like I know I learned that if I put this bomb here, it opens up this cave or whatever, or I know that if I go in this direction, it leads to this area with the trees, and it's all the emergent stuff of just kind of like learning that game, and again having my uncle with me to sort of like chart this out. I mean, we were doing like hand-drawn game guides before they were a thing. We literally had like papers in front of us and drew little rudimentary maps, you know, of the game and of the dungeons and stuff like that. And that stuff is really special. Like that's the stuff that I remember more than the sort of more mechanical things of the game. 'Cause you know, you could talk about that stuff, but it's the little tiny moments that take it beyond, for me.
Yeah. And I love those little moments, and I appreciate you wanting to go there, because you're right. A lot of people talk about, oh, Ganon, and I shot him with Silver Arrow, which is cool, right? I mean, taking on Ganon in The Legend of Zelda was terrifying, because if you didn't know what you were doing after spending how much time in that dungeon, that literal ninth level of hell. Yeah, how, you know, that's fine. But those little moments are cool. I do remember one time, I remember I used to do, like, I realized, hey, there's a row of bushes here. One of these bushes have to be destructive. So I would go through, I'd burn one, nothing. Leave, burn number 2, nothing. Leave, come back, number 3. And after number 3, 4, or 5, you really don't know which bush you forget, you lose count because you can't see that. I remember putting my finger on the screen on the next one I needed to do, leaving, coming back, and now I knew exactly where I was. Burn that bush, nothing. Next one, leave, come back, burn the bush. And when you hit it, right, you're like, yes, I'm a genius. I remember one time I just happened to have bombs equipped, and I just hit I just hit the button. And bombs, of course, in The Legend of Zelda are precious. You don't want to waste those things. And it happened to blow up something in a cave. I got like $100 or something. And again, emergent, right? That's an emergent Inspector Gadget, you know, bumbles his way to $100. And again, all that fun kind of emergent stuff is really, really neat. So I think anybody who played The Legend of Zelda for any length of time has a story like that. You know, when they stumble across or they figure out, oh, the flute, not only, let me play the flute here in this lake. I don't know. Or I think something may signal it. Oh, man, it dries
up. Does this
up.
do anything? Yeah. Can I just try this? Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those, it's, I guess, a series of great discoveries.
Probably one of the most exciting moments for me was getting that first piece of the Triforce from the dungeon and just like, you're holding it above your head and you're triumphant after beating that first boss. And it was just exciting. It was like, wow, I did it. I accomplished something big. And then just going through and discovering all the secrets and collecting all the different weapons and everything. When I finally beat some of these bosses that were just giving me a hard time, like it's a thing that looks like a Venus flytrap, but it's like 4 heads stuck to one body.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. The Venus fly flower thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing always gave me trouble for some reason, but when I finally triumphed over it, it was like, yes, finally.
and Zelda is really good about giving you those moments, right? Like those moments of triumph really feel very earned. And I think next to the enemies also in the original Legend of Zelda, the bosses especially, are pretty fair for the most part. Nothing ever seems completely beyond your reach or beyond your power.
Yes.
That's a pretty interesting game, especially for such an old, Nintendo game, where again, Nintendo games can be brutally unfair. It's part of the appeal for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was either get good or give up, or get a Game Genie,
or get Game Genie. Either one, you could do that too. So yeah, Venus flytrap head, always a terrifying. How did you feel about the final Death Mountain, right? The final dungeon. You, I think you bomb the rock, right? You bomb
the turtle rock.
Yep. And then you go inside and it's this massive dungeon. You navigate it, explore it, die a bunch, return a bunch. And finally you get to the point where you face off against Ganon. Did you know what to do innately, or was this kind of playground knowledge when you reached the end of that?
Oh, that was just a lot of trial and error and just fumbling around in the dark. I had no idea what I was doing.
So you're just trying every combination of bomb and everything else, and eventually you kind of figured it out, because the game doesn't really tell you either. It doesn't give you great information.
Exactly. This is one of those things where it's the final dungeon, but you don't have any clear idea of where it is. And then once you get there, it's just like 3 times bigger than the previous dungeon. So, I mean, there's a lot going on in there.
It's madness. And I think that's where you finally pick up the red ring, which is the best armor, I guess you could say, in the game, if I'm not mistaken, because you can't buy the red. Yeah. You buy the blue, but you can't buy the red. So there's vital stuff in there too. You got to find. There's 2 major items. It's crazy.
And finally, we conclude our exploration of the original Legend of Zelda game with comments from Blue Williams and a final set of thoughts from Seth Sturgill.
Legend of Zelda is a brilliant game viewed in the context of its time. I think that going back, especially as an adult, like remembering how I saw it when I was a kid, but not being able to really spend the time with it, and then going back as an adult when I could spend the time that I wanted and going, this is rough. It is open world, but it kind of, there's a lot of that. It's harder to get immersed in. I'll say that.
Sure. It's fair.
I mean, it's an open map, but it does that thing. Of course, the technological limitations of the time, like you have to walk into individual panels as opposed to just a seamless open world flow. And there's the exploration is great. It doesn't seem to be much in the way of puzzle solving, despite puzzles being a huge part of the Zelda franchise in the future. It's more like trial and error and guessing.
Yeah, which push against every block in this room,
right?
And hope something happens. Yeah.
No,
you're 100% right. Yep.
Throw a bomb against every rock and see which one has something behind it, despite the fact that you can only carry 8 bombs at a time.
Which is also so restrictive. That's
so restrictive. So you're stuck trying to make educated guesses, but there are no clues whatsoever about where you should throw your bombs. So it's rough. It's great, but I'm not sure it has aged super well. Like if you were a child of the 80s and you get a game on your birthday and that's your game for the year to last you until your next birthday, then yeah, great. it has enough trial and error in it that you could
Right.
probably entertain yourself for a year. But as an adult with thousands upon thousands of games vying for your attention, you're like, I don't have time for this. I have to go to work in the morning. I can't just sit here and try to blow up every block on the screen.
For Legend of Zelda, if someone were to, and actually I think you already kind of stated its case really well. I almost know if we want to move on to a different one, but I like to ask, obviously the Legend of Zelda, like you said, it really does require time and space to really appreciate and get a handle of. Even as a modern gamer, if you ignore, avoid the temptation of maps and walkthroughs and all of our stuff, what would you say to convince somebody to give it a shot?
I would say, and this is kind of my viewpoint on video game guides in general. I think that, I think it's really cool to have any sort of outside element that can kind of like take the game beyond just the screen. Like if you can have, Phil Summers' hand-drawn game guide next to you, if you could have that copy of Nintendo Power next to you, suddenly it feels more real. Even if it's just I've got the walkthrough up on my phone from Zelda Dungeon or whatever, like suddenly it feels a little bit more real because you've got the outside real life element influencing what's happening in the video game. I think there's merit to that.
Sure.
And B, I think it's just like, I think it's just really simple. It's like, it's video games, it's, you're supposed to have fun. If you feel like you're getting stuck or frustrated and you consult a guide or whatever, then I think that's totally fine. When I recommend this game, when I recommend the first Zelda, or Majora's Mask is another great example of this, I'm like, if you get frustrated, like, don't feel this weird sense of pride or obligation to not use a guide. Like, there's no shame in it. Just have fun.
It's your experience, and it's your time, and a lot of people, of course, enjoy to have that, to have that friction, and that's awesome. But I have 2 kids and a job and the rest of it. Man,
Sure.
Sometimes I gotta take a dad win and be like, went far enough. I'm good. Let me see.
Yeah, and I don't think it makes. I don't think it means that the game is poorly designed either.
Oh, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. No, of course.
I know a lot of people who kind of have the stance of like, it's bad game design if I feel like I need to pull up a guide, and it's like, well, no, because that's all subjective. What you find difficult or challenging or like guide worthy is going to be different from what somebody else finds, that has no bearing on the quality of the game design. So if you feel like a guide would improve your experience, then I absolutely recommend it. For the modern gamer who is going to pop onto the NES, Nintendo Switch Online app and play Zelda, then I would say pop in there completely blind and see what happens. Just kind of play. Like it's just go, just play. And if you get stuck or frustrated, sure, pull up a guide. I mean, just, don't be so in your head and precious about it. Just go in there and play, And
I think that's a very nice way of saying it. It's a very elegant way of saying it. It's just play. It's very simple, but the games are meant to be played. All right, so here you go. Games don't need to be conquered.
Right.
They can just be played. And I know a lot of people in my world who love to conquer games. The gentleman who's going to be on the show, he might have been on already. I'm not sure. That's how this show works. Who worked on Symphony of the Goddesses. He also is a platinum achievement hunter. And he has... I think he's like 289 something platinums.
Wow.
And that's what he does. He conquers games. And he has a very specific reason for doing so. And it's actually very interesting, his thought process and why he does it.
Okay.
But, so he likes to conquer games. And that's cool. I think it's an amazing achievement. But there's also people like my friend Mike Albertin, who does the show Games My Mom Found. He is a shameless cheater. He will, if there's any cheat he can get, and he plays a game a week for his show. It's insane what he does. So he kind of has to.
Sure.
But he's always been like that. If he can find a cheat code, a save state, you name it, he's going to use it to get through them because he likes to play lots of games and have lots of experiences. So I think that's a good place to be where you just play with it.
We have covered a ton of ground over the last 3 episodes. We've dissected Zelda as a series and now as a game almost to death. Not quite, but almost. And we have a long way to go in this Legend of Zelda series. There's so many fun things ahead. But when it comes to The Legend of Zelda, the first game, the game we discussed in this episode, I've been trying to find the big narrative thread, like the through line through this game, its origins, and connect it to what we're going to be talking about for the next, honestly, 3 to 4 months. It's that the timeline is pushing out that far, well past the end of the year. And one of the main ones is The Legend of Zelda, especially this one, and all of them to follow for the most part, are games that are made to be played, not conquered. Just like Seth said in that final segment. Now, don't get me wrong, conquering games is awesome, and you can 100% this thing, get every bomb, every rupee, every secret, and that's amazing. And people do amazing things with this game, like randomizers, and try to speedrun it. I love all of that stuff, and trust me, we'll be talking about that a lot as we move forward. But the game design, with its core of exploration and adventure, it's a game that's meant to be sipped, not chugged. It's meant to be savored, not just eaten. Even as you're going through all of that conquering, you're still tasting a really delectable meal. And now this is no offense to those who play this game and just don't want that, right? I trust I'm a dad with no time. I love quick fast food games that are fun and exciting and give me a good solid 3 to 5 hour adventure and I am very happy. But once in a while, I do want to make some reservations and sit down to an elaborate meal. And those are the types of games that I think The Legend of Zelda really is all about. And this first one set the table beautifully. And I am all done with food analogies. On the next episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we look at the much maligned sibling of The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. It's going to be a really interesting episode. It's longer than this. I'm amazed I got through this in under an hour. After the last 2 episodes, which were chunky, this one was nice and slim. I think that was good end result. The next one's going to be a fun one, so please come back for more. As I said, this Zelda series is likely going to take me well into January of 2023, so if you love Zelda, keep it here. If you don't, there's 50 other episodes to listen to, and honestly, there's lots of other podcast friends I have. Listen to any of them. Check out my Twitter feed for more. And until next week, remember, it's okay to just have fun.